Bizarre encounter in a New England forest. Here's a little context. This happened when I was a child, and to this day I really can't explain it. I'm going to tell the story as objectively as possible, without adding my own interpretation, because I love to tap into some group intelligence and see what the readers think. I think it's important to mention that I am now 35 years old and a very logical, evidence-based, scientific person. I work as an analyst for a large organization and deal with information, statistics, and numbers. I'm a big follower of Occam's razor and believe that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. In case it's important, I'm a guy. I'm going to write this pretty quickly without too much editing to cut back on too much editorializing, so forgive the lack of polish. This encounter occurred when I was about 6 years old in New Hampshire. At the time, my family was renting a renovated house that had been built in the 1700s. Some of the original house remained on the exterior. I recall a hole in one of the modern interior walls that one could peek through and see an 18th century toilet, which was on the second floor, and basically a wooden seat with a hole. The waste would fall down a vertical column in the wall and into a bucket that could be accessed through a small door from outside the house at ground level. Admittedly, an awesome place to live as a kid if you're the adventurous type, which I was. The property sat on 80 acres that included a large forest and a small pond about a mile back behind the house. My dad, sister, and I would often walk out to the pond, which entailed a 15-minute journey through the dense New England forest. We called the pond Beaver Pond, owing to the many beavers that lived in the area. My sister is 2 years younger than I, so she was about 4 years old at the time. One day, the three of us made our usual walk to the pond in the early evening. Soon after we arrived at the pond, for some reason, I wanted to go back to the house. I don't believe it was anything unusual. I might have had to pee or something. As a kid, I was pretty peculiar about only going to the bathroom in a real bathroom. My parents were a little overly proper about those things, and I was a little neurotic. Halfway along the pathway home, the forest had started to dim a bit, and I got uncomfortable, so I began to run. I'm not sure why I wasn't looking in front of me. I might have been glancing to the sides and back as my paranoia mounted, and suddenly, bam! I ran into it. Shocked, I took a step back, and this is what I remember seeing. It was at least 3 times my height and stood on 2 legs. It was completely covered in long, gray-brown, slightly matted hair. Not fur, but hair, similar to a human's. I recall it looking like a sloth, especially the head, that was walking upright on hind legs, with very slow movements, almost as if it were moving in slow motion. I don't remember any facial features. Its arms were held up, kind of like a kangaroo's front legs. Bizarrely, it had a red ribbon or bow around its neck. I didn't sense any malice or aggression from the creature. If anything, I got the feeling that it was surprised to see me, just as I was surprised to see it. As soon as I got over my shock, I ran around it and continued running back to our house. I glanced back and saw it slowly turning its entire body around to look at me as I raced home. A couple of days later, I asked my mom if she remembered me telling her about the incident, and she did, and added a couple of details. She said that I did describe a face and eyes watching me, and that at some point it hid behind a tree to watch me. I don't recall this part. Epilogue. When I was about 18 years old, I was watching an episode of Unsolved Mysteries with my late father, and a segment about a Sasquatch sighting came up. After the segment, my dad told me that once, when we lived in New Hampshire, he took my sister in the family station wagon for a drive through the woods, around our house. He said that, at one point, both he and my sister saw something brown race across the road in front of them. At first I thought it was a deer, he said, but I quickly realized that it had a humanoid shape and stood on 2 legs, taking giant strides. I recently asked my sister about this, and she remembers it well. So, there you have it. I know all too well about the fallibility of memory, and readily admit that there are a lot of inconsistencies, like a red bow, seriously? But I've documented exactly what I remember, no more, no less. At the time of the encounter, I didn't know anything about ghosts, monsters, or the Bigfoot. I did, however, have an intense phobia of primate faces for the rest of my childhood, up until I hit adolescence. Some people have suggested I undergo regression hypnosis, but to be very honest, I'm a little afraid to do so. I can't shake the sense that there was more to the encounter that I cannot remember, or was somehow lost. There could be a perfectly normal explanation. In fact, this is most likely. However, I haven't been able to come up with anything that makes sense, other than the whole thing being the overactive imagination of a child. So, to the thing I encountered in a New Hampshire forest as a child, I really want to know what you were and wouldn't even be opposed to getting another look at you. Creepy giggle from the forest. So, I face the foresty area in my apartment complex, and there's a small parking lot in front of my building. It was about 8:30 p.m. and my friend, Kyle, and I were sitting outside on my apartment's patio. I'm on the second floor. It's dark outside, and snow was on the ground because it snowed a few days before. Note, there's no lights on the side facing the forest, just the floodlights from the parking lot that give off a tiny amount of illumination. Other than that, it's black. So, me and Kyle are sitting outside because we got hot inside my apartment, and I was feeling sort of woozy, so we thought we'd get some fresh air. So, we're just talking out in the cold and looking out into the forest for a little while. And this little, maybe 5 to 7-year-old girl's giggle comes from the forest. It's probably 15 to 25 degrees outside. No kid should be out in the friggin' forest in that. Plus, it was dark outside. So me and Cal got scared as hell and rushed back into my apartment and locked the patio door. Honestly, it did not sound like it was coming from the parking lot or an echo. It sounded like this came directly from the forest. Now, I almost know it wasn't someone from the actual apartment units, because we would hear a door open or something, and it wasn't a car. Plus, there were no cars opening and closing, no other voices, other than that creepy laugh. The thing in the woods. I'm not very good at punctuation, so try not to get too triggered. This happened to me and my 3 friends many years back when we were kids, maybe 10 years ago. The date was March 7th, and I was having friends sleep over for my birthday. We're all spooking each other out, which could have led us to just seeing this out of imagination, but I doubt it, as we all saw the same thing and at the same time. So, we were all spooked out, because I told a story about how there was a collapsed tent in the woods that's been abandoned for years, which is a true story. We all decided to go to the best place to enter the woods. A few minutes after talking about how we weren't scared to enter the woods, we saw a man wearing a torn white shirt, pants of some kind, and a copper-looking mask, which I think was indeed made of metal with one eye hole, a glass lens, I think, walking in the woods. He then walked behind a tree, and we all ran away at the same time. I am certain it was not something normal, because of the one eye that was Cyclops-like, and that the area of the woods he was at was almost on my property. This was a weird experience, I thought, and I thought I would share with the community, and see if anyone has any idea on what it or he was. On my recent adventure in the woods, for the past 3 years, I have a lot of strange occurrences, like being hooted by human-sounding voices, and many at the same time. And another time I was going into the woods, and I felt like something was off, like I was being watched and hunted. I ran out of the woods, but not without fearing for my safety, and thinking I might not escape whatever I was feeling. I literally had to hop over streams and stuff to get out quickly. Something in the woods. This is something that happened to me about 2 days ago. I live on the very edge of the country, about a 5-minute drive from the city. That day, I had taken my 2 dogs out for a walk in the forest at the back of my property, and had stopped in a small clearing to have a smoke. I was only there for about 3 or 4 minutes when I started hearing sounds off in the forest. At first, I wrote it off as some random animals, or maybe I was hearing things. But as the sounds grew closer, my dogs stopped what they were doing and became agitated. I froze and listened really closely to the sounds and found that they sounded as if a large group of children was off in the forest. There are no kids that live on my street, and I've never heard anything like this before, to be honest. It sounded similar to that scene in the Blair Witch Project, when everyone is getting chased through the woods by the ghost kids. If anyone is able to either debunk or tell me about any creatures that can mimic a human child, I could very much appreciate that. This is not my only experience in that forest, and if anyone is interested in hearing more about them, tell me, and I'll make another post. The Singing Tree. I remember when I was like 10 years old, I always visited my grandparents, who lived in the village during summertime. I would wake up in the middle of the night to hear a chime, a weird bell-like sound in the distance coming from the woods nearby. When I told my grandmother about it in the morning, she would look worried and then tell me it was nothing. Only after years later, she told me that the way I described how the bell sounded like, she was sure that it had been the death bell. Many years ago, back in the village, some people who were members of a forbidden communist party was taken away into the woods to be tortured and killed in every possible horrifying way. The mass massacre took place in a clearing in the woods between 2 massive rocky hills, dubbed the Winterluth Field. The bodies were never found. Long story that I unfortunately gotta skip, but our governments were so anti-communist those days that they would justify just about everything to rid the country of anything that was considered communist. By the way, a Winterloth, not its original name, the real name is in the local language, which I found amusingly sounds a bit like a woman's genital in English, so I decided to come up with a new name that sounds similar, but less anatomical. Is a rare endemic singing tree whose trunks and branches make eerily high-pitched sounds when swaying in the wind on a breezy summer day. The bell-like effect happens when the wind is powerful enough to distort it, and then carry it down the rocky hills where it echoes against the rocks. That's why the locals nicknamed it the Singing Tree. People used to make flutes and other music instruments from it. The thing is, after the massacre, the locals were too scared to go too deep into the forest, and whenever they heard the Winterloaves sang in the death of night, it just reminded them of those poor souls. They went deep into the forest and felled a tree, chopped the large sections into tiny bits and burnt it all, and they never heard the singing again for many, many years. But some people had indeed heard the ghostly sound of the Winterluth singing occasionally, and they swore it came from the clearing where the massacre occurred. There could be more Winterluth in the deepest and most remote areas of the forest, but to produce that creepy bell-like effect, it must be in the precisely right position, making it very unlikely that it had been the sound that I or the other people had heard. And it only happens at night, when a thick blanket of fog covers the whole forest. It has to be the density of air that helps in the reverberation as well. I called my mother the other night and asked her about it, and she's just as clueless as I am about the legends surrounding the tree. But she told me that, as a child, her parents always told her and her siblings to not go wandering too deep in the forest, especially that one part where the mass massacre happened. It was like the singing tree had become an omen for bad luck to whomever heard it. I find it really disturbing that all of a sudden I have nightmares about it. since I had almost completely forgotten about it. In my dreams, they are quite terrifying. I am in the dark, and I can't see anything at all, so I have no idea where I am. But then, I hear this bell-like sound start to summon me from every direction, like invisible walls of sound closing in on me. It is very disturbing. Hi everyone, thanks for the feedback. First of all, I didn't expect that where this happened would be so important to everyone to know. I just wanted to share my experience here, because I believe that it is paranormal related. I am not one to ever ask myself elaborate questions as to whether ghosts really exist or just a figment of our imagination. All I needed is a little help to explain this ghostly sound that I heard as a child. There are so many questions inside my head. Why did it pop up in my dreams after so many years? The singing tree phenomenon can be easily explained by science, like the singing sand in China, or another similar tree-related phenomenon in South America that I vaguely remember reading from a book in high school. But was it really a phantom Winterlude singing that I heard? I have explained that it is a rare endemic tree of unknown species, and I have no idea how to describe its appearance since I've only heard it by name. And it is indeed a very rare occurrence that can only happen in the right circumstances, and how many species of trees out there can produce such a sound? I am coming home next year, and maybe I'd take the time to visit the village again to find out some more answers. And I am really sorry to say this, but I can't tell you where it happened. We have very sensitive issues on communist-related things here for many years that it is considered highly controversial to talk about it openly, and to reveal the local name of the tree would be just the same as giving it away. All I can say is that some of you have guessed it correctly, that it happened in Europe. And if you really want to know, I don't want anyone to lose sleep over a stupid tree who sounds like a woman's bits tonight. I'm not entirely superstitious. I would like to believe that there were more trees like that could produce such a sound, and that could have been what I heard. And as much as I want to believe that the others are really there, I must say that most of the folklores and myths are just plain stupid, if not totally exaggerated to the point of disbelief. I want to know why after so many years, Winterlude has returned to haunt me again. I remember feeling very disturbed when my grandmother told me what I could have heard that night. I've come up with some really silly theories as to what it really was. I mean, if this is something paranormal, maybe that bell-like sound had indeed come from those poor souls. The bodies were never found. Rumors have been circulating for years that, after killing them, the bodies were buried en masse or dumped off steep cliffs alongside the mountain to lie out in the open, to be eaten by wild animals or engulfed by shrubs and any other plants, lost forever. If that is the case, then maybe those poor souls were reaching out to me and whomever could hear their cries that night, considering they were brutally murdered and unceremoniously buried. They were just trying to find some help to find them and give some closure to their agonized families. I don't know. A part of me wants to believe this.